Hi, everyone. Today we're speaking with DJ or Dan Chichester, writer on Daredevil, Nick Fury, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Night Stalker, Hardware, and so many more. Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely, Brian. And just a slight correction, it's Chichester. So it's
Chichester, I
it's
apologize.
it's badly mispronounced on this side of the pond. If we were in England, you would be in the right, but I screwed it up over here, and I'm going to stick by my screw up. So
So, the reason for this talk is you first created the Daredevil in the black armor suit way back when. And
yes,
now
way
you
back
way,
when.
way back when. And you are recently returning to it. And the first issue you're doing with if I'm pronouncing his name right, Netero Diaz.
Netho
Netho.
Diaz.
Netho
Yes,
Diaz.
yes.
And the
Hmm.
first issue is coming out on November 22nd.
Yes, it is.
So can you tell us a little bit without giving anything away, just a little bit about like what the plot is, somewhat?
Sure. And I want to give a little credit, not a little credit, half credit and big credit to Scott McDaniel, who was my partner in the
Right.
mid '90s when I worked on Daredevil, and he created the visual for that black armor, that suit that came out of the Fall from Grace storyline. Is certainly his visual creation. We
Right.
talked about it, and I gave some ideas on what it would be made of and so forth. But all props to Scott's visual stylings for making something that now has kind of become memorable.
Yeah.
In the day, we had some pushback, but um, well, just a little bit of a backstory, I guess, around this. Marvel approached me at a convention,
Mm,
not no less than CB Cebulski, who's the editor in chief,
right.
who came up, introduced himself, and I was like, "Oh man," and he was very nice, and I thought we were just having a pleasant hello chat, and then he opened the door to, "Would you be interested in doing something, with us? We've done these kind of back in the day series,
Right.
things that sort of take place a little bit in the past, not really 25, 30 years in the past, but sort of Marvel time on that."
Right. Right.
And I said, well, yeah, my mama didn't raise no idiots. I'll talk to you about it. And and the last thing, honestly, I expected them to say, I figured it might be about Daredevil or whatever, but I did not expect them to say we want to do this costume because, as they said, we took a little bit of grief for it. So I laughed, and then as we started to talk about it, and Devin Lewis is the editor on Daredevil, and we started to discuss, okay, what could this be about? And he really pushed some interesting things in my mind because originally I didn't have anything in mind. I didn't have any
Right.
untold stories of Daredevil. I didn't have like, oh, I'm going to fix the things in a way. I had been forced off the book when I was writing it. Wasn't happy about it, and but it happens, and you go on.
Right.
So it wasn't like waiting for, oh, someday Marvel's going to call. Um, and so as we introduced ourselves to each other, he said, why don't you try using some villains that haven't been used before with Daredevil? Why don't you push him up against some bigger challenges? Why don't you just kind of go into some different places? Here's a few things we should do. We should definitely make Matt Murdock suffer. That's
Right.
that's not a surprise. Um, and we talked a little bit about, well, what is, if you want to bring the suit back, the armor back, what is it about? Is it a story that just happens to feature the armor, or is the story about the armor? So these were all kind of interesting thoughts.
Right.
And then there was no immediate deadline. It was just kind of an introductory conversation. And in this interesting place where I find things really work out nicely is sometimes things just kind of percolate in the brain.
Right.
And then it was this August afternoon. I remember it was like really hot, just kind of sitting outside. And I just started to write down these key points of, what if it was this villain? What if it was this kind of threat? What if there's this kind of conflict? And it just sort of like flowed out. Now, when I ran it past Devin, he was like, man, that really works well, which I was, but You got to do this. And how about this? And how about bringing it back around here? All of which were great suggestions. You know,
Right.
they both pushed me and then I think oriented me in the right way. So what it ends up becoming is in this timeline, I had kind of written myself into a corner, right? I
Right.
didn't think I was going to be off the book. Matt Murdock had faked his death.
Hmm.
He had taken on this persona of Jack Batlin, who was
Yep.
supposed to be this sort of seeing con man who was going
Yep.
to base himself in Alphabet City. He had a new cast of supporting characters. This Jack Batlin persona was going to keep him connected to the street. So this new Daredevil, this armored Daredevil, could fight crime and yet not make people think that Matt Murdock was alive, which would
Right.
put his friends and whatever at risk. And so I suddenly realized, oh damn, I got to deal with all that baggage as well, right? So in this instance, we meet Murdoch. We meet him wearing this Jack Batlin mask. We meet him a little bit separated from Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen keeps calling back to him
Right.
because that's his home and that's where he's grounded and that's where he came from and such. But he's a little bit separated from it. And in that separation, things have been happening, right? Certain things that he is not even fully aware of. People have started to kind of be pulled off the street, hardcore people, hard case people
Right.
maybe on the edge of the law, but not necessarily bad people. And the rougher element, as it were. And then he starts to become more aware of this. And as he starts to come in conflict with some of these bigger villains who he hasn't necessarily faced before or
Right.
hadn't faced at that time. Sabretooth is one. Hobgoblin's going to be another one. These are
Oh,
no
wow.
surprises. I think we've seen some great Mark Bagley covers that have featured, some of this. And he is going to discover something that is at the heart of Hell's Kitchen that's going on with a bigger villain behind it and bigger other villains that villain is bringing into play, and he's literally just going to be dragged into this, which is going to help him get his footing back a little bit.
Okay.
Not that he was off base in this storyline of mine, or story mind of mine, but he's going to discover a little bit of ways to kind of navigate this. How do I use this Jack Batlin? What does it mean to me as Matt Murdock? What does it mean to me as Daredevil?
Hmm.
What does this armored suit mean? And what does it represent? So it's just been a really interesting, I guess, discovery for me because I wasn't really expecting all those things. So I
Right.
think it's become this much richer story. And man, the second I saw Netho's artwork, it just blew me away. I don't know how much you've seen of it, but this guy is off the hook in terms of what he's doing, and it immediately became his and my story, if you will,
Oh, that's
because
great.
he owned it like right away. Like I was used to working with great people. I mean, I've worked with
Yeah.
Lee Weeks and Scott McDaniel, and Ron Garney did one great issue of Daredevil, and so suddenly who's this guy? I don't know him, and boy, now this is his character for this run. This is his suit for this run. He is just owning it, and I'm so thrilled to see what he's doing with it.
It's great. I mean, the one thing about the entire Fall from Grace storyline, it's not
Yeah.
just I felt, at least when I was reading it, it's not just you created a new persona for Matt Murdock in Jack Battling, but I also felt we're getting kind of a edgier, darker Daredevil than we've seen before. It was
Mm-hmm.
even Daredevil's persona was a little changed. It's like in the following story arc, was it
Tree of
the
Knowledge.
Tree of
Mm-hmm.
Knowledge?
Yep.
Yeah, when he goes up against Cap, it was just like, let's try it, Soldier Boy was just like, oh,
Right.
wow.
Right.
the,
Because
the Daredevil I know would never say something like that to him.
right.
Like, wow.
I was probably in a very dark place too. And that was part of what he was trying to do, because that was part of of convincing people that this was not the Matt Murdock Daredevil, because certain
Right.
superhero and colleagues of his, as it were, some of them knew that Matt Murdock was Daredevil or suspected it at least. So he had to make Daredevil a little edgier, a
Right.
little rougher, a little more forceful in some places, beyond even just the look of the suit, so that people wouldn't say, "Wait a minute, are you Matt Murdock?" Because would that Daredevil have said things like that? Would that Daredevil been quite that? Never to the extent of really harming someone,
Right.
but in he didn't deserve it, but being a little bit more on the edge. There's a scene, I think, in Tree of Knowledge where he grabs a gun from somebody and he trains the gun on somebody to kind
Right.
of say, "I'm not the old Daredevil," or
Yeah.
like you said, the feedback. So there's some of that in this story, and certainly when you see the full extent of what Netho has done with I'm going to say the ferocity of the look.
Yeah.
It's not it's not like over the top where suddenly this is Carnage Daredevil, but it is definitely a an amped up say 90s sort of approach to things, and it feels so appropriate to this armored adventure,
Right.
which is just being proven to me to be a lot of fun.
I think you really summed it up in just that one panel in Elektra Root of Evil when she says how much he's like stick now. I think
Yeah.
that just kind of that just summed up everything for me. I was just like, oh yeah, I can see that.
Do you even look in the mirror? Right. Do you even see what you look like? Yeah. And that was just just made so nicely by Scott's illustration there. He just captured it so perfectly in that pose and everything.
It's funny because I do remember the costume did get a lot of flack at the time, but there has
Oh
been
yeah.
people don't like change. I mean,
They don't. I mean, I can not imagine what I'd hear today, from every corner. But now
right.
people actually seem pretty positive on it, so
Oh
which
yeah,
is nice.
it's the action. I mean, it was 2 years ago, I think, when the action figure came out. It like
Yeah.
flew off the shelves. I
Yes.
couldn't find it anywhere. I was looking for it
Yes.
myself, and it was just like, oh my God, it really
I
sells.
am convinced that that figure helped redeem the costume as much as anything else. And this book is going to triple down on that.
So, what are you mean? What do you like about Daredevil that you like writing about him?
Um, I think the dichotomy of him is so clear cut and
Right.
interesting. The friction between lawyer and vigilante is just such a great contrast. Um, but I think the thing I appreciate the most, at least the way I've always approached it, is that stalwart, never give upness attitude, which certainly many people tap into. I'm not unique in that, but I think there's also a little bit of I always looked at him a little bit more of a redeemer, and by that I mean the things he's doing are ultimately about trying to help the little people. Not that he's
Right.
above them, not that he's lordly, but the overlooked.
Yeah.
The meek. The meek shall inherit the earth in its way is to me something that always comes through. And again, many writers do this and handle it
Yeah.
extraordinarily well, but that to me has been something that I've always kind of come back to, even in the grimmest, roughest moments, is it has to be about that. That
That makes sense.
salvation is not for him. That Catholic guilt and all the redemption
Right.
and everything else. I don't think the salvation's ever for him. The salvation is for other people, and that's also something I found in this story has been working out well. I got one more to script, so don't screw it up, Dan. Um, is in with those characters I'm saying are getting pulled off the street and
Right.
who they are and trying to give some of them personality and and meaning. They become important elements in that journey for Matt. And something else, since you asked, it's a really good question, and I don't get that one, very often. Is I think there's also something I always enjoy about playing Matt slash Daredevil as a little bit of a rogue trickster, and by that I mean
Right.
he's this super sharp lawyer, and he knows how to play people off each other.
Yeah.
And I like that idea that he's going to suddenly see the angles and create this chaos, I guess.
Yeah. Kind of a controlled chaos, but yeah, but
Yeah,
chaos.
controlled chaos. Yeah, he's gonna like set things in motion. And I had a lot of fun with that in this story by introducing even a couple of, again, this was again coming from Devin's initial suggestion. Why don't you just think about bringing in some people you never would have brought in before? And I was like, oh, well, what if I did that with that Marvel character and that Marvel character? I think there were certain places where I wrote the character in the past where I would be very particular about, well, Hell's Kitchen is here, and Daredevil's this noirish street character is here, so you can't go too big.
Right.
You can't bring in some things. But here I just kind of reached over and let me have that toy. Let me have that toy. And let's see what we do with it and go a little bigger. And at the same time, when you go a little bigger, you make it work for your rhythms, which I feel we've done here.
Right. I totally agree.
And I'm sorry for the vagaries around certain
No,
things.
no spoilers. I mean, one of the I really liked Fall from Grace. Definitely, like you said, Scott McDaniel on that book.
Mhm.
It was his art at the time was very refreshing because everybody was just using those like streak lines from when
Yeah.
Daredevil's doing his acrobats, and here you have Scott McDaniel doing like every little like movement
Oh
until
yeah.
it was just totally his art is still incredible. I mean, is
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
my
It
favorites.
it was thrilling to I mean, I just loved Scott and I loved the partnership, and I thought we came to have a really, really good synergy, but I especially love being part of that transformation he put himself through with Fall from Grace, where he made that conscious decision to kind of break off from the previous art style he had been
Right.
doing and start experimenting with more of what I think would become his trademark style, at least for a good while. It was really exciting to see him stretch himself and try things out, which was a perfect story to do it on.
And now it seems like a lot of artists are copying his style in a bit. I mean, I I mainly noticed it a lot like when he was doing Nightwing.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I'm seeing it's like before that it was just like I said, the streak lines and stuff. And now I'm seeing everybody trying to do the same type of thing.
Yep.
It's watching all the movements, and it's just every artist after Scott has just been trying to do that with Nightwing, and it's one of the
Yeah, yeah.
funniest.
I mean, he had a very successful run on Nightwing, so that's not surprising that people would try to emulate that, right? That's what you do. You look at it and say, "Wow, that was good. Let me try and make that happen."
He was also one of the first to kind of really put that acrobatic in. You always heard, Dick Grayson's this circus guy, but it was like
Yeah,
the first time you really saw a lot of this
right,
stuff. Right?
right. Yeah. No, I never read any of Chuck Dixon's plots for that or scripts for that. So but I mean, no, taking nothing away from Scott, but knowing Chuck Dixon is a very good writer, I'm sure that he also probably thought about that. Let's bring this to the fore. Here's something that's not been played up as much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing, what you're going to do back with the, when you did leave the book, the the first thing they did was pretty much got rid of that Jack Battling character.
I know.
It was
It's
just like
hysterical.
you
It's
were you were in the
hysterical.
middle of building up something that's interesting and different, and I like
Oh
the
my God.
concept of him being this confidence, a con man, confidence
Oh,
man, and it's just
it cracks me up, Brian. I'm so glad you brought that up. I didn't read the book after I left it, immediately after I left it.
Right.
I picked it up now and again. Picked up, some of Bendis's stuff and Mark Waid's stuff, because I like Mark Waid, and and then the recent Zdarsky stuff. But I didn't read it consistently, and I certainly did not read the issue right after I left. And I think if I had read that issue, where I think it was Warren Ellis they brought in, to literally spend 22 pages destroying the costume, and
Yeah,
Matt Murdock kind of going, "What was I thinking? What kind of idiot was I?" And literally taking this biomimetic hardened material and armored plating and chopping it up with, I think, scissors from Walmart or something.
yeah.
I think if I had read it in the day, I would have been so depressed, so like, oh my God, is this how little they think of my work? And I probably would have thrown myself off a water tower. But having read it recently, because the Daredevil office sent me all these PDFs that I didn't have, as well as a lot of
Right.
PDFs of stuff I worked on, so I didn't need those as much. But then I read that one, and I was laughing. I was howling the whole time. And I just said to myself, man, that was a waste of 22 pages of storytelling. That was like
Yeah.
that was just a waste of an opportunity. And even just, in terms of whatever editorial was thinking in those days, it's this kind of thing that you've vetted this costume. I didn't do this. Scott didn't do this. Like the editorial offices had changed, but still, why not have him go, yeah, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to put this into the Daredevil cave, or, cold storage.
Right.
But somebody obviously had a stick up there, whatever, or Billy Club up there, whatever, about that costume, because they certainly spent good money telling a pointless story to
Yeah.
make sure it was destroyed. And guess what? It's back. So there you go. But
I mean, referring to, my question before about what you liked about Daredevil, it's funny because
yeah,
all you really hear is about, the so-called Parker luck, but it's just like nobody's gotten just not even the physical, but the mental beat downs in all his years in being in comics and Daredevil, and he keeps getting back up no matter how many
right,
times he keeps getting beaten down mentally. It's just
right, right.
he's a fighter like his father, and he
That's
doesn't give up.
exactly right. It's the fighting mentality, and it's the fighting for something. Even the and it's interesting. I never really played with his father, and this is I do play with a lot with his father. There are quite a few scenes where I have him, flashing back or thinking back to his father, and using that as a kind of a motif. You'll see through the issues, which I think has turned out really nicely, and that's was good, new, fresh material for me. But I think that's an important component of, obviously, the character. The father
Right.
was a fighter; he's a fighter. The father uh, couldn't fight for good ideals necessarily in the ring, right? He was
Yeah.
compromised and such, but he did carry things on his shoulders for his son,
Yeah.
and tried to do what he can there. And so he fought to be that father, to that son as best he could. And I think that is a little bit of the redeemer quality that comes through for Matt to a big extent.
I definitely agree with you there. uh Kind of on a weird question.
Yeah.
What is your opinion about the live action version that they've had so far? I know they've had I know a lot of people hate the Ben Affleck one, but to me, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. But
It's not the worst
it's
movie
not the
you've ever
worst.
seen, but it was. I remember when the movie started. I and I feel strange saying this out loud, but I remember the shower scene with Ben Affleck, but
Yeah.
the because and I don't think I misremember it, but I remember him kind of coming back from a night on patrol or whatever, and then he's sort of in the shower and he's bleeding and he's spitting out some teeth, and it's like, okay, that's a good vibe. That's kind of like the thing.
Right.
But it was in that weird in between space of like filmmakers who didn't quite respect the material,
Yeah.
but they sort of thought that they knew what superhero film should be. So you make a costume that is a little better than a TV movie, but isn't really that great. Your
Right.
storyline is pretty much by the numbers, picked up from any mob film or revenge film or you're my equal opposite type of
Right.
thing. There was a point in time where it seemed like every superhero film had to have the character's logo light up in gasoline,
Oh
fire in a
yeah.
parking
Yep.
lot, and especially for a blind guy, that's really important. Um,
And they
but
they all had to be. The other thing is, at the time, they all had to be as dark as Batman, and
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's
but also feel kind of like chintzy and a little plasticky, sort of
yeah.
like it's at the Spencer store at the mall, to date myself, but so I wasn't going to say it's well intentioned. It's sort of like it's just that like it was a thing of its era, I
Right.
guess, and so deeply unmemorable. Ultimately, it wasn't even like a swing and a miss. It was just kind of like okay, somebody's trying to manufacture something here,
Yeah.
but without really the respect for the material. It's like Stephen King movies from that era as well, or at least the late '90s up to that point. In my mind, as a big Stephen King fan. People who didn't respect the material versus now you see Stephen King adaptations
Right.
clearly made by people who were brought up on this stuff
Yeah.
and they're
It's
getting it right. So
yeah.
the Netflix show, I guess, would be the other big one though. I loved from the opening credits on. There were some moments of I guess TV structured awkwardness,
Right.
but limited. Overall performances were great. Charlie Cox is terrific. D'Onofrio was just man, that's the kingpin.
Yeah.
Um, and the extended doubling down, then tripling down, on those incredible scenes in the hallway or the stairwell or the prison. Just bravura sort of filmmaking and making it feel like something really unique and totally sensory. And I love that moment I think it's the second season where he's fighting the I don't know, bikers or something in the stairwell, and
Yep.
the gun is like strapped to his hand and he can't get it off, and he just like there's just this like fuck it smile on his face. He just like realizes I'm
Yeah.
not going to get this off, and it's he just throws himself into it instead. And I love that raw energy of it. And
Yeah.
there was a great moment, at least for me, desperately looking for anything, I guess, of when the costume finally did show up, even though it's not the the traditional costume, nor is it the
Right.
black armor costume. There was clearly some acknowledgement that this guy's going to need a little bit more
Yeah.
protection. And so somebody at least was thinking along the same lines we were. So I remember thinking, finally some validation. But I deeply enjoyed those, and I look forward to seeing what they're going to do. It sounds like they're in the process of some significant retooling on the way they're going to approach it. So,
Yeah.
uh, which could be good because I'll be honest, I haven't been, uh, and I think like a lot of people, overwhelmed with the way a lot of the Marvel shows have
Yeah.
paced themselves out.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Like his appearance on She-Hulk was definitely way different than the Netflix show that we're used to.
Yeah,
And they also something I just noticed in it, like when they're both going in that warehouse, none of the gang members have guns. They have crossbows. And I'm like, is this like trying to be anti-gun? I mean, it's like
I don't know. I don't know.
it was the weirdest thing for me.
I didn't notice that. I have to go back and watch that. I didn't mind the the what did she say? Like the ketchup and mustard, bold choice,
Yeah.
type of approach to Daredevil there, just because I was thinking to myself, totally without any insight really. If you're going to bring him back and you were going to do some kind of born again storyline, it actually makes more sense for him to start in a slightly more happy place
Right.
and rip him down than have him be kind of like we saw on Netflix where he was already flogging himself in the confessional and moping around the city streets, and then if Kingpin's going to take him down and ruin his life, and then he's going to turn things around and come back, you almost want to start him, a little bit more like, hey, I kind of got
Right.
my life together, I got my practice together, I hook up with She-Hulk, and type of thing, and then it goes to shit. But who knows, where it goes now. We'll I'm very open to judging it just based on what it is when it comes out.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold it up against Netflix and say, oh, it's not as dark as this or whatever.
Yeah, you got to watch it on its own. A lot of,
Totally.
yeah, I mean, obviously there will be nerd rage on Twitter as always.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and that's I think people cheat themselves out of a lot of good stories sometimes when they uh and they narrow it that way, right? It's like, oh, it's not that story. Well, did
Right.
you enjoy that story? That whoever told, that Anna Senti told, that Mark Waid told, or something, or that was told on the Netflix show. Great. Nothing here changes that story,
Right.
right? Here's a new story, and if it's great, embrace it and watch where your character that you like goes. And if it sucks though, it's going to suck on its own merits, not just because
Right.
it didn't play out, more Netflix season 4, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. I mean, as a comic fan a long time ago, I learned they're adaptations. You're taking, like, on some of these characters 60
Right.
years of history, and you have to put it in sometimes like 120 minutes minimum for a movie.
Sure.
And then appeal to an audience not familiar. You're going to have the geeks and the nerds. Those are guaranteed tickets. But you also have to appeal to an audience that's not familiar. I mean, it's the stigma, around with superheroes. I remember going to see Watchmen in the theaters, and
Mm.
I see people bringing in their kids thinking it's a superhero.
Sure, that went
I'm
over
like,
well.
and then they're shocked at what they saw, and I'm like, just because they're in spandex doesn't mean it's for kids.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or Dr. Manhattan not in spandex
Yeah.
with the kids, and that was like the moment of look away, Johnny. Yeah, I mean, that's I guess that happens in anything, right?
Right.
Parents bring kids to all sorts of things. I'm sure if I went to see, Killers of the Flower Moon, there'd be some kids in the audience.
Oh yeah. So we got Daredevil coming out November 22nd. Yeah,
Yes.
working on anything else?
I'm working on a Kickstarter project, which is a bit of a supernatural thriller, kind of an adventure, a little bit Army of Darkness meets From Dusk Till Dawn meets The Good Place. So it's got a kind of a grindhouse feel.
Cool.
A couple of truckers who have to make deliveries from not just one hell, but many hells, like every
Okay.
culture's hells. And so these two truckers are really driven by the main character, Percy Cross, is this young woman who gets dragged into this in the first issue, and then off and away with these adventures. It's really her story. So we're trying to crowdfund the first issue. It's all done. If folks are listening to this or this comes out before it's up, we got like about 10 more days, I think, on the campaign. It's at bit.ly / Axles Infernal is the name of it. Axles Infernal is the name of the book. So that's fun. That's been fun to work on. Carl Waller's my partner. Kickstarter's a little exhausting, more than I thought. And Black Box Comics, which is a smaller publisher, but have done a lot of interesting titles, have approached me about a couple of things. I've written actually a 5-issue sort of cyber heist thriller for them. So sort of like a near future sort of dystopia type of thing. I don't think they want to give out much more detail on that, but that's written and that's in the process of being illustrated, which was a lot of fun to work on. And then they also approached me about something else. So I'm in the process of I took them through my general idea on that, and now I'm starting to break that down into plots and then scripts So that looks like that'll also happen.
Great. Can't wait
Yeah,
to
yeah,
check
it's
it
fun.
out. I appreciate you talking with me today, Dan.
Oh, absolutely, man. No,
Thank you
it's been a
so
lot of
much.
fun. Thank you for making it happen and doing it at a reasonable hour. And